The people who hurt you the most are often the hardest to forget. You tell yourself to move on, but your brain keeps returning to the same person again and again, not because the pain was small, because emotional wounds change the way memory works, and sometimes your brain becomes addicted to the person who hurt it. The terrifying part is that the brain remembers emotional pain more powerfully than emotional safety, meaning the people who damaged you most can become psychologically impossible to forget. There is someone in your past, maybe it has been months, maybe years. You have moved on by every external measure, new routines, new relationships, new chapters. And yet, in quiet moments, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, they are still there. The person who hurt you most, occupying space in your mind that you did not invite them into and cannot seem to evict them from. You have tried. You have tried not thinking about them, which only makes you think about them more. You have tried understanding them, forgiving them, hating them. Nothing fully works. The thoughts return, and with them comes a second layer of suffering, the shame and confusion of still being affected by someone you know, rationally, you should be over. You are not weak. You are not damaged. You are experiencing one of the most thoroughly documented phenomena in all of human psychology. And once you understand the neuroscience behind it, the experience will never feel the same way again. The paradox at the heart of this is one that researchers have only recently begun to fully map. The brain does not treat emotional pain the way it treats physical pain. A broken bone heals in a predictable arc: inflammation, repair, remodeling, resolution. Emotional wounds, particularly those inflicted by people we trusted and loved, do not follow this arc. They follow something far stranger, something that, from a purely neurological standpoint, looks far less like healing and far more like addiction. In 2010, neuroscientist Helen Fisher at Rutgers University conducted a landmark study. She placed recently rejected individuals inside an fMRI scanner and showed them photographs of the person who had rejected them. What lit up in their brains was not the pain processing network. It was the dopamine reward system, specifically the same regions activated by cocaine, gambling, and other forms of behavioral addiction. The ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, the caudate nucleus. The person who hurt you is not haunting your thoughts because you are weak. They are haunting your thoughts because your brain has neurologically classified them as a reward source that has been unpredictably withdrawn. And unpredictable reward withdrawal is the single most powerful driver of compulsive thought in the human brain. To understand why painful relationships are so neurologically sticky, you need to understand one of the most important and most counterintuitive principles in behavioral neuroscience: variable reward schedules. In the 1950s, psychologist B.F. Skinner conducted a series of experiments that changed our understanding of compulsion. He found that when rewards were delivered unpredictably, sometimes after one liver press, sometimes after 50, with no discernible pattern, laboratory animals became dramatically more persistent and compulsive in their behavior than animals receiving consistent rewards. They would press the lever hundreds of times without reward, unable to stop because the brain had encoded the behavior as potentially leading to reward at any moment. This is the same mechanism that makes slot machines so powerful. Not the winning, the unpredictability of winning. The brain's dopamine system does not respond most strongly to reward itself. It responds most strongly to the anticipation of possible reward, and that anticipation is most intense when reward is intermittent and unpredictable. Now apply this to the person who hurt you. In most painful relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendship-based, the harm did not come without warmth. There were good moments, moments of genuine connection, affection, understanding. These were interspersed with moments of rejection, cruelty, neglect, or betrayal. Good and bad, warm and cold, close and distant, unpredictably, with no reliable pattern. Your brain, following its deepest programming, responded to this unpredictability by massively upregulating its dopamine sensitivity around this person. Every positive interaction became more intensely rewarding precisely because it was uncertain. Every negative interaction did not extinguish the seeking behavior. It intensified it because the brain interpreted it as evidence that reward was still possible, just not yet delivered. This is what researchers mean when they describe trauma bonding as neurologically similar to addiction. It is not a metaphor. The same neural circuits, the same neurotransmitters, the same compulsive cognitive patterns are operating in both cases. Thinking about this person is not a choice your conscious mind is making. It is a compulsive behavior your dopamine system is driving toward a reward source it was conditioned to seek and has not been given clear signal to abandon. There is also a second mechanism operating simultaneously: the Zygarnik effect. Named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, who documented it in the 1920s, this principle holds that the human mind persistently returns to unfinished or unresolved tasks far more than to completed ones. Waiters remember uncompleted orders, students remember unsolved problems, and brains return again and again to relationships that ended without resolution, without the explanation, the apology, the acknowledgement, the closure that the mind is waiting to receive. The person who hurt you did not give you closure. That is often not an accident. And your brain, treating the relationship as an open loop, keeps returning to it, searching for the ending it never got. There is a third reason this person occupies so much of your mental real estate, and it operates at a deeper level than dopamine or unfinished loops. It has to do with how traumatic memory is encoded differently from ordinary memory. The brain's memory system is not a single unified structure. Different types of memories are processed and stored by different systems. Ordinary autobiographical memories, what you had for breakfast 3 Tuesdays ago, a pleasant afternoon from last summer, are processed through the hippocampus, encoded with context and time markers, and stored in a way that allows them to be retrieved, examined, and filed away as past events. Traumatic memories work differently. When an experience involves intense emotional pain, perceived threat, or betrayal, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, intervenes in the encoding process. Flooded with stress hormones, particularly cortisol and adrenaline, the amygdala essentially overrides the hippocampus's normal filing system. The memory is encoded with extraordinary vividness and intensity, but without the normal contextual markers that tell the brain, this happened in the past. It is over. It is not happening now. This is why traumatic memories feel so present. Why a song, a smell, a phrase, a certain quality of afternoon light can suddenly transport you back with a physical intensity that ordinary memories never produce. The brain has stored the experience not as a past event, but as an ongoing threat pattern, something that needs to remain accessible, ready to trigger a protective response, because the threat has never been neurologically processed as resolved. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose research on trauma spans 4 decades, describes this as the brain being stuck in the past, not metaphorically but literally in terms of neural activation patterns. Brain scans of individuals with trauma show that when they recall the traumatic experience, the regions associated with present tense threat response activate, not the regions associated with memory retrieval. The brain is not remembering a past event. It is neurologically re-experiencing a present one. And then there is the question of identity. The person who hurt you most was almost certainly someone you were deeply connected to. A parent, a partner, a close friend, a mentor. The connection was not incidental to who you were. It was partially constitutive of it. You understood yourself partly in relation to them. Their view of you shaped your view of yourself. When that relationship ended in betrayal or harm, it did not just hurt you. It created a rupture in the narrative of who you are. Psychologists call this shattered assumptions, the collapse of fundamental beliefs about yourself, about others, about how the world works. And the mind, confronted with a shattered narrative, does what it always does with unresolved problems. It returns to them, compulsively, searching for a way to make the story make sense. Everything we have covered so far explains why willpower alone cannot stop these thoughts. You cannot decide to stop being addicted. You cannot resolve an open neurological loop through intention. You cannot unencode a traumatic memory by choosing not to think about it. What you can do, what the research shows actually works, is engage the specific mechanisms that drove the problem in the first place. The first intervention, narrative reconstruction. Because the mind returns to unresolved stories. One of the most evidence-backed approaches to processing painful relationships is expressive writing, a method developed and extensively studied by psychologist James Pennebaker at the University of Texas. In controlled trials, participants who wrote in depth about their most difficult experiences, their thoughts, their emotions, their attempts to make meaning, showed measurable improvements in psychological well-being, immune function, and cognitive processing compared to control groups. The mechanism, Pennebaker argues, is the transformation of raw emotional experience into narrative structure, a beginning, a middle, and crucially, an end. Writing does not change what happened. It changes how the brain categorizes what happened. From open, unresolved threat to closed, processed past event, you are giving the hippocampus what the amygdala denied it: context, time markers, and a sense of completion. The second intervention, retraining the dopamine system. Because the compulsive thinking is driven by a reward system conditioned to seek this specific person, the brain needs what researchers call extinction training, the gradual withdrawal of the seeking behavior combined with the introduction of alternative reward sources. This is why no-contact recommendations from therapists are not about punishment or anger. They are neurological strategy. Every time you check their social media, reread old messages, or engineer accidental contact, you are pressing the slot machine lever, reinforcing the seeking circuit rather than allowing it to extinguish. Simultaneously, deliberately investing in new sources of genuine reward, not distraction, but authentic engagement, begins to rebuild the dopamine landscape. Exercise, creative work, deep social connection, mastery of new skills. These are not replacements for what you lost. They are the construction of new neural architecture. The third intervention, somatic processing. Because traumatic memories are stored in the body's threat response system, not just in conscious narrative, purely cognitive approaches have limits. Research increasingly supports body-based interventions, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Developed by psychologist Francine Shapiro and now one of the most evidence-backed trauma treatments available, works by engaging the brain's bilateral processing while traumatic memories are activated, allowing them to be reprocessed and stored as past events rather than present threats. Simpler somatic practices, regulated breathing, physical movement, progressive muscle relaxation work through the same basic pathway, activating the parasympathetic nervous system to signal to the amygdala that the threat has passed, gradually updating the brain's threat model. The final truth, and it is not what you expect. The goal is not to stop thinking about this person entirely. That goal, pursued directly, produces the white bear effect. The more you try not to think of something, the more you think of it, a phenomenon documented by psychologist Daniel Wagner at Harvard. The goal is to change the quality of the thinking, from compulsive, unresolved, threat-coded rumination to integrated, contextualized, past tense memory. The person who hurt you most changed you. That is real, and it cannot be undone. But the neuroscience of plasticity is equally real. The brain that was shaped by that experience is capable of being reshaped by new ones. Not back to who you were before. That person is gone. Forward into someone who carries what happened as history rather than as an open wound. That is not forgetting. That is not forgiving if forgiveness is not something you choose. It is something more precise and more personal than either. It is the brain finally, after all its searching, filing the story away, not as unfinished, but as done. And eventually, you realize something painful. You were never addicted to the person. You were addicted to the hope that they would finally stop hurting you.